In this class, we'll be discussing the life and work of the Malayalam auteur Govindan Aravindan. But first I'll start with a quote from Politics of Hunger by Glauber Rocha. It is to show how great minds think alike in different parts of the world. Rocha writes, wherever there is a filmmaker prepared to stand up against commercialism, exploitation, pornography, and the tyranny of technique, there is to be found the living spirit of the new cinema. Rocha was working in Brazil, one of the founders of the Cinema Novo movement. Aravindan was working in India, in Kerala, one of the great figures of New Indian cinema, which was an interrogative movement, seriously entertaining but questioning the former commercial format, especially of Hindi cinema, and of course its pale imitations in the other Indian languages. Aravindan came late to filmmaking. He was working with the rubber board when he made the decision to plunge into this competitive and frenzied field where most filmmakers are known to come at an early age. But there are honorable exceptions like Satyajit Ray in Bengal or Aravindan in Kerala. He also came to cinema without any training in a film school. Nor did he serve the usual apprenticeship under anyone. He came with an open mind, a tabula rasa, a white sheet. Therefore, he did not have to unbaggage some of the things that important filmmakers trained in film schools have been known to do in course of their career in filmmaking. New Malayalam cinema rests largely on three important pillars. First, there is Adur Gopalakrishnan, a product of the Pune Film School. He is the chronicler of social and political transformations in the life of modern Kerala. Modern meaning both the last years of British rule and the several decades in independent India. The second pillar is John Abraham, who is the political pamphleteer, who died prematurely, not yet 50, after making Amma Aryan a milestone in Malayalam, read Indian cinema. And finally we have Aravindan, who is the mystic, the magician, the lyrical poet, dwelling on social and individual problems in modern Malayali life. Before he came to filmmaking, he was an extremely popular cartoonist. He was also an illustrator and painter, deeply immersed in theatre, had more than a working knowledge of music, Indian music, both Hindustani and Carnatic schools. But above all, he was into a philosophical interpretation, in many cases, of very contemporary problems. The first film he made was called Uttarayanam. It's about a young man looking for a job, wanting to find a place in the sun for himself and his family. This did not create the kind of stir in the critical mind of onlookers in, say, the way Pothir Pachali had done in an earlier time, or even Adur's Swayamvaram or Shambenegal's Ankur did. But keen viewers could detect the arrival of someone who was removed from the usual and the ordinary run of filmmakers. With his second film, Kanchana Sita, he really made the cinephile sit up in wonder. This film depicts a part of the Ramayana. The roles of Ram, Lakshman, the Rishi, and Ram's children are played out by people of indigenous stock. Sita is not to be seen. There is Purush, visible, Prakriti, symbolizing Sita, is invisible. So there is nature. Nature in wonderful manifestations present in this story of the family in exile. One instance can be given of the way Aravindan's mind used to work, constantly in communion with the elements. The wind sururating through the leaves of the tall trees in the forest, making a magical conversation, so to say, with the visible characters in this story of the Ramayana. Hard-headed rationalists in Kerala panned this film. Others called it blasphemous. But there was no stopping film estates, not just in Kerala or in other parts of India, but beyond India, into recognizing the arrival of someone who was truly extraordinary. However, Aravindan's real days of glory were yet to come. It arrived with the film called Thump or Thambu, Circus Tent. This film without a screenplay, a film that just happens, so to say, is about a group of itinerant circus performers who have left their best days behind them. It's a truckload of improbable characters, a few animals, dwarfs, a big muscle man, the manager, a few lady performers, acrobats, who pitch their tent on the banks of a river. The river's waters flow, so do the lives of the performers and those from the village who come in groups to watch animals and men perform in almost a mythical manner. After the arrival of a festival in the village, the crowds thin out and the manager decides to fold up the tent and leave the village. This black and white masterpiece was hailed all over the world in countries as distant from each other as France, United States and Japan. And in India, aficionados were thrilled by this, what can be called loosely a docudrama. This film has been shown all over the world. It is studied in important film schools and has come to be a part of the history and folklore of New Indian cinema. Thump was followed in quick succession by Kumati, a children's film, Esthappan, about a Christ-like character who comes from the sea and one day, after doing a lot of things in and around the village, recedes, goes back to the sea. And then Pokkuvel, which is about a young man, sensitive and a little lost, who suffers from hallucinations and has to be confined in an asylum. These three are important films in important ways. Kumati shows the feverish imagination of the director at work, where a singing minstrel, he comes from nowhere to the village, enthralling the children of the village with his stories and songs, even gets angry with one boy whom he converts into a dog, and only a year later, on another arrival to the village, restores him to his former shape, human shape.
Tudam tudam, kudam kudam nivarte.
One can still see in one's eye the sun going up on the village and the long bearded, ape-like looking old minstrel making his grand majestic entry into the village. Tadao Sato, the eminent Japanese critic, has said that this unclassifiable masterpiece is one of the finest films by any filmmaker that he has seen. That sentiment has been also there in the writings of many an important Indian critic.
Karugara karmugil kombanana purateri ezhunnallam moorte manasaga nananyallo teeganju kidannallo oliyunnu valiyunnu.
What followed these three films was a dramatic enactment of a story of forbidden love and of a strange kind of atonement for it. The film in question, Chidambaram, named after the famous temple town, won Aravindan, the Swarna Kamal, for being the best Indian film. After that, we come across a film called Oridhatu, which was in a sense a throwback to the sensibility of Thump. Though it does not rise to the heights of the former film, it gives the viewer an idea of the fertile mind of Aravindan that was still at work. This story about the coming of electricity to a Kerala village was read by some critics as being against the course of development. Aravindan said with a pained heart that he was disappointed at such a reaction. This is a delicious film. The transformations, the changes that progress, so-called development bring into people's lives is the theme, the subject of this film. Earlier, young lovebirds would seek refuge after dark in unvisited nooks of the village. Once electricity came, they were not able to meet any longer and have such privacy. This is just one slice of the film. Development, Aravindan wanted to say, is a many-sided affair. It often robs us of innocence, of purity, and drives us into the open, where things are no longer that subtle. It is a film that has to be read with an open mind, and some people did just that. But the other camp, hard-headed Marxists, most of them, who refused to see beyond the tip of their own nose, had other uncomplimentary, unflattering things to say about the film. But today, several decades after Aravindan's passing away, untimely and tragic passing away, when we see the film anew, we realize how wrong these unfavorable critics were. Finally, we come to the film called Vastuhara. Before I go into the film, I want to make a remark that holds good not just for Kerala or the other cinemas of the other southern states, but even for the cinemas of central, north and western India. Namely, the indifference of filmmakers largely to the trauma of partition. Aravindan was a trailblazer here too. His was the first attempt by means of Vastuhara by a southern director to enter into the pains and perfidies of a tragedy affecting millions of people out of a decision taken without referring to the victims by a bunch of leaders who wanted so-called independence at any cost, forgetting the huge human cost involved. Vastuhara is about Venu, a Malayali rehabilitation officer entrusted with the duty of choosing certain so-called low-caste Bengali families for resettlement in the wastes and wilds of the Andamans. He was supposed to come to Calcutta. Aravindan was supposed to hold the All India premiere of the film at Nandan, the West Bengal Film Center, when a few days before the scheduled premiere, he suffered a severe heart attack and died. Aravindan came late to filmmaking, without any training in filmmaking. He made at more than one nugget of a film and died prematurely. But these are not the only things that we should remember. In the final analysis, we have to consider the fact that Aravindan's films are remarkable when we consider that the silences of the man, the silences that marked his best films, and the silences that spoke between the artist and his best viewers, call for endless celebration by the lovers of New Indian cinema. Another thing very important about Aravindan's vision of life and vision of art is that he inspired to creativity by his own example many others working alongside him. Verily has it been said that the true artist lives and works not just for himself, but goes out of the way to make sure that those coming after him or working alongside him get the support and recognition they deserve. Simultaneously, Aravindan was enriching himself by his association with his peers. If the word gharana can be used in connection with cinema, here was an example of a man who lived not so much for himself as for a parampara. He wanted to create a niche for new Malayalam cinema in the sacred larger grotto of New Indian cinema by taking along with him a whole lot of youngsters who are doing their important work in the different areas of cinema: camera, sound, storytelling, et al. In conclusion, we must remember that if New Indian cinema was enriched by contributions from the South, especially Malayalam cinema, Aravindan's role in the whole thing was of great importance.